So we're already running slightly late, as you can see.
I know. Just I don't know how I stop share.
Don't worry. So as
I will leave simply.
Yes, as the chair of our second session, I'm so glad to have three enticing lectures waiting for us about gems in the context of other media. So our first speaker is Chiara Ballestrazzi from the Freie Universität Berlin, who is also going to give a lecture in the second one. Chiara, are you there? Can you share your screen?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Do you hear me?
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Ergun, for organizing this. We wish we could be all there with you instead of in Berlin and in Oxford. So Chiara, do you have pictures? Do you want to share your screen with us?
Yes, sure.
Go ahead.
This.
So Chiara is going to talk about glyptics between painting and sculpture. Oh, and there it comes. So yes, we can see your screen. Thank you so much. That looks splendid, the Astasios gem.
It is said that Alexander the Great prevented anyone from depicting his portrait with the exception of the greatest master of each art. Lysippus for sculpture, Apelles for painting, while Glyptics found its champion in Persephone, a gem engraver mentioned in Alexander's edict and otherwise unknown. But while Apelles and Lysippus recur in all the attestations of Alexander's edict, from Cicero to the Byzantine era, Persephone and Glyptics are featured only in Pliny's Natural History and Apuleius' Florida, a passage which was probably based on Pliny's account. Glyptics seems to be an evanescent art within the canon of the arts, to the point that, as I will point out in my next talk, in classical antiquity there was no history of the art of gems equivalent to those of painting and sculpture. A combined analysis of both literary sources and material artifacts will delineate ancient glyptics as a Colloquian art that employs a technique akin to that of sculpture, but operates on a medium naturally endowed with a strong mimetic potentiality. Philostratus the Elder listed glyptics among the forms of the Plasticae techne, which were distinguished from each other by the medium in which they reached the mimesis of nature. Painting proves superior to any Plasticae, to any sculpture, because of the mimetic vividness of its colors. Unlike sculpture, painting can perfectly imitate the Aegaea and differentiate the use of the eyes and of other things. Then, Philostratus an effigy of Aphrodite, framed by glittering painted gems. Previously, Philostratus has relegated glyptics among the plastic arts unable to imitate the Aegaea, the lights of the eyes, which are perfectly rendered only by the more mimetic art of painting. But here, the gems painted with light and made convex by reflections like those of the pupil of the eye are Aegaea themselves. Although the glyptic technique is stricto sensu sculptural, its medium, precious stones, is instead color and light itself. Gems are much more than an artistic medium, like clay, marble, bronze, or ivory. They are an art themselves. They are natural painting. With gems, it is actually possible to paint. A painterly poikilia or pictura adorns objects studded with precious stones. As Pliny says, mosaics are elaborata arte picture ratione, composed by tesserae akin to gems set in rings and jewels, while the sectilia of marble on walls and floors are the result of lapide pingere. Pliny even describes a pigment produced from vitre gemme. The relationship between a sculptural technique and a pictorial medium, as well as the mimesis generated by the interaction of human and natural art, is an extraordinary chance for ancient aesthetics. Heliodorus describes the pastoral scene engraved on Princess Charicleia's amethyst as a graphe, a painting. The natural colors of the amethyst were indeed employed as pigments by the engraver painter, so as to produce an amazing painting. The natural color and light of the amethyst participate in the mimetic representation of the sunlight and of its reddish reverberation on the fleeces of the sheep. This interaction between human and natural artistry was a fruitful topos for lithological epigrams long before Heliodorus' ekphrasis, and is also sometimes found in material gemstones. But this fluidity of glyptics goes far beyond the cooperation of human and natural artistry performed every time the engraver gives an iconographic role to the colors and pattern of the mineral. Some side intaglios and cameos share a curious feature. At least 12 Hellenistic, late Republican, and early imperial gems bear the names of celebrated Greek painters and sculptors. The signatures of painters and sculptors on gems appear surprising in face of some engravings clearly inspired by famous sculptural prototypes that omit the identity of the author of the original work and declare instead the name of the imitator. This is the case of the red jasper engraved with Phidias Athena Parthenos signed by Aspasios. Like many other artists before and after him, Aspasios appropriated the Phidian subject, as well as a herm of Dionysus, a more ancient masterpiece that Aspasios carved on a second jasper. Sculpture offers many examples of other artists' masterworks reproduced by a second artist, or, on the contrary, of new creations dignified by the signature of an acclaimed sculpture of the past. And looking at the more slippery pictorial side, no less than 3 vase painters found it advantageous to sign their works with the name of the Thasian painter Polygnotus. That some vase painters claim to be the Polygnotuses of ceramics is not surprising, given the proximity between vase painting and megalographic painting. But the engravers who changed their name with that of painters or sculptors enacted a transition from one medium to another. This material and artistic convergence stems from the peculiar relationship of glyptics with painting and sculpture, and from the role of the artist with respect to the medium of glyptics. The phenomenon appears even more significant since, as I will remark in my next talk, we do not know any engravers signing with the name of the engravers of Alexander and Augustus, nor of any of the few engravers celebrated in Greek and Roman literature. One possibility is that these signatures were intended to add dignity to the subject, that thus should be interpreted as the glyptic version of a statue or a painting, of course, with more or less pertinence. For example, displaying the lyre on an amethyst signed Pamphilou is unlikely to derive from a work by the late classical painter from Amphipolis, exactly as the youth on a 3rd century BC garnet signed Freie Sepoi cannot have anything in common with the master of the Parthenon. About this connection between signature and subject, jokes the engraver Aspasius, appropriating the Dionysian urn originally sculpted by a 5th century BC Greek artist, exactly like a sculpture appropriating an illustrious sculptural prototype. Aspasius and the engravers who assume the identity of celebrated painters and sculptors thus deny the autonomy of Glyptics, signing their entire as if they were reduced paintings or sculptures. But the link between Glyptics and the two major arts goes far beyond the sharing of iconographical models. These gems bring us back to the hybrid nature of Glyptics, a plastique which is also graphé, a sculpture which is also a painting, as Philostratus and Heliodorus suggested. In cameos, the forms are outlined by 2 or more contrasting colors, and the pastoral intaglio described by Heliodorus is a graphé thanks to the shades of the amethyst. Both cameos and intaglios meet representative conventions similar to those of painting. The engraver has to transpose a 3-dimensional subject into a new form sharing both the 3 dimensions of sculpture and the 2 dimensions of painting. Aspasius needed not only to reduce the bust of a sculpture over 12 meters high in the tiny space of the jasper, but also to deeply rework his model by adapting an in-the-round effigy to the convention of Glyptics. He depicts the goddess in profile, a rather unusual point of view for a monumental cult statue. But this choice conforms with the conventions of Glyptics, which favors this perspective. This novelty forced the engraver to turn to the left Athena's bust, so as to show the insignia of the goddess, a variation imposed by the 2-dimensional pictorial conventions of the intaglio. Moreover, the new profile view goes hand in hand with the cut under the breast, which deeply affects the original iconography, making the monumental cut effigy quite close to a typical Glyptic portrait. These reworkings go with the radical material and chromatic alteration of the subject, which, famous for its execution in gold and ivory, is now proposed in a uniform red that in no way recalls the original colors, but perhaps adds new meanings to Aspasius' version. All these features make that specific image no longer Phidias Athena Parthenos, but instead Aspasius Athena Parthenos, thanks to a reworking that is not only technical and iconographical, but also functional, even beyond its new sealing use. The monumental Athena Parthenos is humanized and proposed to an intimate contemplation. And on the contrary, standing on the top of the urn, Aspasius proposed his intaglio as if it were the sculptural original urn that, depicted in a 3/4 view, a rather uncommon perspective for Glyptics, this way still keeps its original monumental 3 dimensions, also in the 2 dimensions of the gem. The relationship of Glyptics with painting and sculpture is much more than a sharing of iconographies. Glyptic artists were aware of facing a natural medium that was both stone to be sculpted and pigment with which to paint, in order to realize a work that was both plastique and graphé, both sculpture and painting. Some among them thus chose to place themselves under the aegis of the most celebrated masters of painting and sculpture. Others cleverly exalted the innate pictorial mimesis encapsulated by gems, becoming themselves sculptures painters like the artist praised by Heliodorus. Thank you very much for your attention.
Oh, wonderful, Chiara. Thank you so much for a very inspiring talk. For our next one, because we have so little time, we're going to have Elena Almirall Arnal from Barcelona.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for choosing such an amazing but often forgotten topic, especially to Ergun Lafley, who's been in charge of all the communication. So thank you very much.
Before I continue, is there any problem with the video? Any sound problems, any video problems? Can someone confirm?
Yes, we have problem with the sound. Sound has somehow an echo. It is difficult to understand.
Okay, let me check it again.
My conference is called Ancient Greek Engraved Gems, a new proposal for interpretation. And what I will propose is that traditionally, the typology of engraved gems has been divided into two broad categories: property seals and amulets or talismans. In this study, and with the idea of analyzing them in depth, I have classified these two groups as seals for civil or practical use and seals for therapeutic or magical use. In both cases, they are personal stones, engraved and usually set, but while in the first group mainly involves a phenomenon of representation, in the second, they have been chosen for their precise powers and in response to a specific need. This conference is based on the first type of seals, those for civil or practical use, which after carefully studying their iconography and thoroughly analyzing the Greco-Roman sources, we have divided into several subgroups, as we will see. As we know, true seals and sealings are not attested in the Aegean until the 3rd millennium BC. And the need for seals seems closely bound up with the evolution towards social complexity, which coincided with the growth of proto-urban settlements. From this time onwards, we can trace the development of seals and sealing practices for well over 1,000 years, encompassing the great palace civilization of Minoan Crete and Mycenaean Greece. Evidence of all this has already been found in Minoan Crete, where we can find seals, sealings in clay, and even we have evidence of a workshop in Malea, which was dedicated to engraving of stones. The act of sealing has different purposes. It can serve to guarantee and recognize identity, but also to protect and to preserve. And on the other hand, it is also an indicator of status. In the Greek world, the seal is something fully implanted, and the proof, one of the proofs of this is the fact that humans use it, but also gods do. As we can see from this saying of Athena in the Eumenides of Aeschylus, that she says, I also rely on Zeus. What need is there to mention that? And I alone of the gods know the keys to the house where his thunderbolt is sealed. So as we already said, we are going to talk about seals for civil and practical use, and we won't be talking specifically about their iconography, but it is important to establish that the division we propose is based above all on it. One of the things that surprised me when I first started studying Greek seals was the amount of hybrid beings we could see in them, which made me believe that there had to be a reason for this and made me arrive to the conclusions I'm going to present. So we divided the seals for civil or practical use in 4 categories, which are administrative and official seals, personal seals, seals for initiations, and seals with sexual scenes. The first group, those dedicated to administration, are bureaucratic seals, already found in Cretan palaces. Wills, documents, slaves are sealed. And we also have reference of the seals, the public seals of some cities like Athens. The earliest evidence of the use of seals in Greek culture is mainly associated with administration and is linked with the idea of securing property. We have already stated that the first Aegean seals are related to the growth of proto-European settlements and specifically with the Great Palace civilization. Engraved seals soon became a bureaucratic tool at Knossos and other Minoan palaces. In fact, we know that, for example, in Phaistos, 327 different seals were used. Then we go to personal seals, which were used by men and women, and that they were copied and falsified. And apart from all the remains that we have that have arrived to our days, are also mention of them in the ancient sources. In antiquity, seals were equivalent to the signature of their owner and acted as warrantors of the identity of the author of a letter or a document. The seal would identify its owner, and precisely for this reason, it could be used to deceive, as we see in several texts like Polonius' Stratagems, in which Polydorus gives a ring to a trusted man, and he asks the wife of this man 10 talents of gold, which she trusted him for the ring, and she gave the gold right away. Then we can also see, for example, in Sophocles, women of Trachis, that Deianira sends the magic shirt to Heracles through Lycas, knowing that he will recognize the seal attached and will not hesitate to put it on. We know that some of the Greek heroes had their own personal seal, like Agamemnon, for example, is the most famous example, since all Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides mention the seal of the king of Mycenae. Likewise, the sources inform us that philosophers also had their personal seal rings, and even women of a certain status will have their own seals. We have found references in the tragedies of Euripides, specifically in Hippolytus. After Phaedra's suicide, Theseus finds a tablet written and sealed by her. And then in Orestes, when he explains that Helen had a personal seal, which she used to indicate ownership of her goods. Concerning women's seals, the studies of Eleni Drakaki are very interesting. We also know that forgery was a common practice. The most famous example is found in Aristophanes' Thesmophoria Susi, when he explains how women made cheap copies of their husband's seal in order to open seal doors. Therefore, and to avoid such falsification as far as possible, Solon in the 6th century BC dictated a law that established that the ring engraver could not have the seal of a ring after selling it, which shows us once again the importance of seals and the scope of their meaning, as well as the fact that seal rings were commonly used in Athens at that time. Then we arrive to seals for initiation, which is the proposal I made in my thesis. We understand seals for initiation as a type of seals that people would receive or acquire after going through an initiation. The iconography of this kind of seals would be hybrid beings, heroes, specifically Heracles, Hermes, Aphrodite, and Eros. In the same way that today, when one performs an initiation ritual, he or she receives a symbol related to it, why not think that the Greeks would also have some kind of signal to recognize themselves within a specific group? Take, for example, Christian rituals. After baptism, a medal is usually given. Rings are exchanged in marriage, etc. Also, in secret rituals such as Freemasonry, there are different insignia to mark the degrees of the apprentice in their evolution. And when a honorary doctorate is awarded with cap, gloves, and a book, he or she is given a ring. The idea is always the same: to distinguish oneself, to be recognized among equals, among members of the same group, among those who know a secret or have undergone a specific ritual. It is not a family emblem, but rather the symbol of a group previously chosen and whose membership in it has involved a process, after which something has changed in the person. Initiations are rites of passage in which the aspirant, after performing a series of ceremonies, habits, or protocols, will change state, cross a door, and leave behind what he or she used to be to start a new life, to be a new person, to be reborn. The experience of initiation is usually recognized either publicly by a community or only within the circle of a group. According to Judith Weingarten, the first seal of Knossos was imprinted with a parade of lions, which she believes could have served as an emblem of an emerging elite of that would precede the founding of the palaces. The choice of a lion as the main insignia of this group was not an artistic choice, but a social and political one to express the idea of power. She also states that there is abundant evidence from arcanes in Crete to support the idea of an elite that progressively acquired power and that in turn reflected it in symbols such as seals. In the case of Greek society, the two main initiations were the passage from ephebos to hoplites for boys and marriage rituals for girls. They had also mystery initiations, private association, guilds or clubs, and professional associations. So we think that the images of hybrid beings might have been linked to this kind of rituals. Hybrid beings belong to two different worlds, and they have traditionally been associated with funerary rituals. They are liminal and ambiguous beings whose hybrid nature transcends the limits of normality and allows them to move easily between the different worlds, relating them and acting as guides through them. They are beings that cross borders and break limits, and whose dual nature, human and animal, is capable, on one hand, of perverting the human being, but on the other, of helping him or her to cross borders, to overcome limits, to surpass oneself, and to become someone new, someone different, someone initiated. These beings were related to passage rituals or initiations, not only to funerary rituals as it has been traditionally established, but also to other kinds of initiations. Numerous representations of the sphinxes, mermaids, griffins, etc. have been found in tombs, but after studying the subject deeply, we can see that they also appear in marriage scenes or hoplite initiations, which, as already mentioned, were the two main rites of passage in Greek society. As Jean-Marc Moret already stated, Oedipus defeats the Sphinx not because of his sagacity or his own virtue, but because he had previously received the initiation reserved for future leaders. Also, Herbert Hoffman talks about the Sphinx as a paradigm of initiation. Other examples that we will develop in more detail in our article are the Harpy tomb in the British Museum and many ceramic vases like the Dinos of Sophilos or the Oinokoe Kigi. We will talk about all these. Concerning heroes, it is important to remember that all the myths that talk about their labors, their troubles, and their adventures are really talking about their initiations. All of them must pass a series of tests to reach their goal. Some of them, like Odysseus, even had to go through Hades. They had to die in life in order to know the secrets that will lead them to their destiny. Maybe the most popular hero was Heracles. His legend is that of his initiation, from the change of his name to all his gifts, and finally his labors. As we already stated, he is the hero most represented in seals. And concerning the gods, those who stand out are Aphrodite and Hermes, and both could be related to rites of passage. Nano Marinatos features Hermes and Aphrodite as initiating gods, both separately and together. Hermes related to maturity rites, and Aphrodite with initiations related to sexuality. And the two united as patterns of illicit sexuality outside marriage. Hermes is the psychopomp. He is the one who guides the soul on their journey to Hades, and he's also associated with the physical education of boys. As for the goddess Aphrodite, who many times shared temple with Hermes and heroes, perhaps the most outstanding sanctuary that can provide us with information about the relationship of this goddess with the rites of passage is that of Persephone in Locros. We also found several passages in the sources that can lead us to think they could be talking about seals for initiation, like Plutarch or Macrobius. We will talk about this. We will develop it in the article. And then we finally have considered interesting to include a section referring to those seals with sexual scenes, even though they could be a part of the personal seals, but their iconography makes it worth to comment them separately. It is not strange to find this kind of iconography in vascular decoration, since they were containers used in symposia and other male activities. But in relation to seals, why would a person engrave an erotic scene on their personal ring? We found possible answers in Clement of Alexandria, who explains what a good Christian should do by criticizing the Greek habits. Specifically, in his book Pedagogos, we can read a fun and interesting reflection about sandals. And I'm quoting, he says, women fond of display act in the same manner with regards to shoes, showing also in this matter great luxuriousness. Based, in truth, are those sandals on which golden ornaments are fastened, but they are thought worth having nails driven into the soles in winding rows. Many, too, carve on them amorous embraces, as if they would, by their walk, communicate to the earth harmonious movement and impress on it the wantonness of their spirit. Thus, the possibility arises that some of these seals with erotic scenes belong to women engaged in prostitution, who in some cases even carried out a surprising marketing campaign by applying those seals on the soles of their sandals, thus leaving their traces when they walk. Something that also seems to indicate that using their services would not be a cause for shame or would be something secret that had to be hidden. On the other hand, also Clement in the same book explains the need to wear seals, not as an ornament, but as a way to mark one's belongings for safety. He explains what should be engraved on these rings: a dove, a fish, a sheep, etc., but never faces of idols, not swords, etc. And of course, never what, as he says, I'm quoting, many of the licentious have their lovers engraved, or their mistresses, as if they wish to make it impossible ever to forget their amatory indulgences by being constantly reminded of their licentiousness. Therefore, also a man in love or obsessed could even engrave an erotic scene to remember his lover. Thank you very much for your attention.
For a very thought-provoking talk. I'm sure you will have lots of questions in the discussion. Now, our next speaker is going to be Marcella Pisani. So we're going all the way to Rome. Marcella, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you, Claudia. I'm here. Good morning to everybody, and nice to meet you, Dr. Wagner.
Yes, so we're going to hear about clay seals and engraved gems, the role of clay or terracotta for the knowledge of some subjects and iconographies on lost gems.
Thank you very much. The object I'm going briefly to present today has been found in 1968 in Camarina, Sicily, reused in a modern wall going across the ancient city between the Temple of Athena and the Agora. Made of clay with a conic handle, the front has a circular imprint with a diameter of approximately 8 centimeters and a half. The imprint, rather clear and well preserved apart from minor damages in the upper part, presents a U-gate portrait following a well-known iconographic tradition started by the Ptolemies. The identification of the couple is possible through comparison with several representations on gems and coin. For the formal and iconographic rendering, the head, barded and crowned with a laurel, appears to be particularly close to a Serapis represented along with Isis on the obverse of a tetradrachme of Ptolemy's for Philometor. And also, even if more idealized, in a gem today in a private collection. Both objects can be dated to the end of the 3rd century BC. Equally part of the framework of iconographic and ideological loans from Ptolemaic Egypt, the heads of Isis and Serapis occur often also in bronze coinage types of several Sicilian mints from the final decades of the 3rd century BC. Close analogies with a couple on the object from Camarina can be found, for example, on the reverse of a bronze coin from Catane, for which the same Ptolemaic matches have been mentioned. Even if the break of the upper part of the mold doesn't allow us to ascertain the presence of the peculiar head covered with the sun and feathers typical of deities from Alexandria, there are not significant issues with proposing an identification with the Isis and Serapis, an iconography often adopted in gems and in clay seals obtained from them, considerably smaller and usually oval. It is more troublesome to reconstruct the use. The handle, and I apologize, I don't have pictures of the back, but the object is actually displayed in a case of the Archaeological Museum of Ragusa that due to the COVID pandemic is still closed, so I couldn't have pictures to show you. The handle is fragmentary but well recognizable. The handle would suggest a use as a mark or stamp, but the small depth suggests that the object was used to leave a positive impression on tender material. The first hypothesis, that it was a tool for the decoration of pottery, seems the most probable. Clay punches of various shape and dimension have been documented in the Greek world in Athens, Corinth, Ephesia, Limnos, Tassos, Crete, Kerkyra, and Metapontum, mostly in the Hellenistic context. It's not uncommon to find in the same areas attestation of the use of these materials. In Sicily, Aegaea portraits of Isis and Serapis can be found in some red-brown glazed cups with mold-made decoration. It seemed that the medallion were attested in eastern Sicily between the middle of 3rd century BC, the age of Hieron II, and the first half of the 2nd century BC was an invention from Syracuse. Recent studies, along with technical and iconographic elements, nevertheless, suggest the presence of other production centers in the Hellenistic and Roman period, for example, in Morgantina. The various relief medallions with Isis and Serapis, known until today, reproduce the couple in various iconographies and with different skins, with busts and heads, always side by side and in perspective, never by profile, as in the seal from Camarina. Further to this, even if cups with relief medallions have been found in Camarina, known as the heads or busts of Isis and Serapis, it's therefore difficult to affirm or deny with certainty that the object presented today was used to decorate pottery. A second hypothesis is that we are looking at an object used to seal or stamp objects and documents. In this respect, it's interesting that the object had been found near the Agora and close to the western area of the city, where the Hellenistic and Roman layers of Camarina emerge more clearly. The excavation carried out by Paola Pelagatti and Giovanni Di Stefano, whom I thank for the kind advice, have shown clearly how the city lied after the Roman conquest of Camarina in 258 BCE, shows a complete change in urban planning. The main road of the classical period, the Platea B, was deviated of approximately 10 meters in the south, in the area between the Temple of Athena and the Agora. And large buildings in which Di Stefano recognized granaries were overlaid to the northern Greek stoa. The intensive production of wheat and the taxation established by the Lex Hieronica have been confirmed epigraphically in a stamp used over vessel for the measurement of products. The seal, attested also in other centers subject to the influence of Syracuse, suggests, according to a proposal first formulated by Paola Pelagatti, the existence of magistrate tasked with guaranteeing the accuracy of measurement similar to the Attic metronomoi. Therefore, it's not possible to exclude that the Aegaean portrait of Isis and Serapis could be used to guarantee the content of vessel or to validate acts and documents. This function would have been carried out by officers and magistrates to whom the possession of a seal with imprint similar to the portrait known from coins would have given authority. Thank you very much for the attention.
Marcella, for an interesting talk in such a lovely range of material. So now we're going over to the discussion, which means, yes, Martin is sitting next to me for our first 4 speakers. Do we have any wonderful questions you have for the first lot? You could just, you know, switch on, unmute yourself, let us know, possibly, you know, if you're more shy, you could write into the chat for us. Do we have any starters? Let me start it off then. Since Martin came in, Martin, what did you think? If you would go, for example, to the Snettisham jeweler and ask for something like, you know, a Sulis, would he have been able to do this? Was he actually an engraver himself, or did he buy his stuff in?
I think he was an engraver, but I think he would have a sort of stock of things, and he'd say, "Well, Sulis, what do you want? Do you want a Minerva? That's what she is." He wouldn't have anything. He wouldn't. Nobody was carving figures of mother goddesses on gems. It was not part of their repertoire. He would have gone to the classical repertoire, and he would have said, "This is Sulis Minerva." I think this is all you could do. They had great difficulty, I think, in getting away from these established Greco-Roman deities as far as representation is concerned.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And of course, there is this weird thing that Bonus Eventus is so dominant, isn't he? Is it just because he's so easy to engrave with a few lines, and possibly people knew him from the coins?
And what they were looking for was something to bring good luck to the crops. I think they're probably less. What they were really interested in was what would make the crops grow really well.
Marcella, are you quite surprised that we don't have more of these clay stems? We don't have more of these seals, or is it just that, you know, not enough houses burned down, so very often we wouldn't even have anything preserved?
I beg your pardon.
Yes, Radu, would you like to ask a question?
Well, it was highly interesting to spot the light on this phenomenon. And so far I know, western and northwestern provinces of the Roman Empire had their own officine to engrave gems. Nevertheless, they didn't use a repertoire of images of their own native culture, converted into a provincial Roman one, despite the fact that they produced themselves such engraved stones. the demonstration is brilliant, but it makes me think about the power of the image and of a foreign culture which can impress so much a native culture on the way of integrating in a larger world, the Greco-Roman one.
Wonderful. Martin, do you want to say anything?
I think that that's true. I think there wasn't a tradition in the West before the Greco-Roman culture for seals and for smaller objects. So that they learnt it from the Romans. They seemed to go their own way when it came to sculpture and to small bronzes, but when it came to gems, these were things that belonged to Greco-Roman culture. And it's not just true of Britain. I think it's also seemed to me true. I've been looking at some of the gems from Dalmatia, for example, and in fact, it's exactly the same in Dalmatia as it is in Britain. And it's again true if you look at the gems, where a lot of gems have been published in Gaul and Germany. And again, it seems to be exactly the same position as in Britain. It's only when you get to the east that you find some really original items.
Yes.
I see. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to this very interesting reflection. For me, this today is an occasion to present and discuss with specialists this problematic because of unique piece from Sicily. And I was still thinking that we have a large objects that we couldn't understand, we couldn't perfectly understand because of the media which are completely lost, like walks, for example. In Camarina, we know that there is a high possibility to have a public archive for the period before the Roman conquest. So for the period which goes from the 4th to the beginning of the 3rd century BC. And it's well proved by a lot of documents, epigraphically documents of arts, and it's also well studied. But for this period, the Roman period, is quite difficult. So thank you for all your advices. Thanks.
Thank you for a lovely talk. Now, do we have any more questions? Anyone brave enough to come forward? Okay, I have one for Chiara, which is coming slightly sideways. As you can see, we're sitting in the BC archive, so I'm surrounded by all these wonderful books made here, in this case, by Paoletti, and in the 18th century, early 19th century, for the tourists. Should we think also, when we're thinking about painting and sculpture, of the impressions which might be made? So in the 18th, 19th century, the tourists really loved to take these away. And in fact, Paoletti had not only famous pieces of Greek and Roman sculpture redone here as gem impressions, but also great paintings. We have Raphael's, Maria, so things like that. So Chiara, what do you think? Did the Greeks and Romans in antiquity were not only looking at the coloring of the stones themselves, but also at the impressions? Were people actually appreciating the impressions?
Probably yes, they appreciated also the impression. We have a lot of clay vases with impressions of gems like marks, but also like decorations. And also, yes, there is also the impression is part of this hybrid status of glyptics, because an impression is both a sculpture, because it's like a relief, but it seems also a monochrome painting. If we see these white or gray stems, they seem like a monochrome. Mm-hmm. So it's very strange. And one thing is that now we consider glyptics like a minor art with respect to painting and sculpture, but in antiquity this was not real, but also in the 15th, 17th, 18th century, glyptics was regarded as one of the most important arts at the same level, or sometimes also better than painting and sculpture. So it's a very changing relationship between these three arts. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a very mixture between impressions, colors of the gem, the relief on the gems, cameos. It's very complicated, and every time is different. The relationship in every gem is different from another.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes. Archaeocat has raised the hand. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Claudia, and all my best to you and Martin. Hello, Martin. It's Kathy Sass from Belgium.
Oh.
What I wanted to, I'm seeing if I can share my screen with you, because I've had a very bad reaction to the COVID vaccine, so I'm not going to put on my camera.
I hope it's not our Oxford vaccine which has made you ill.
Yes, it's the AstraZeneca one.
So. Martin has it too, and he is perfectly fine. Let's take a game to protect you at least.
Yes, exactly, and that's the most important. Can you see the image of the gem that I'm sharing?
Yes, indeed.
Ah, yes, wonderful. Well, this was a gem, a very peculiar find on a Roman farmstead, a very rural one. So it was actually very peculiar to find a gem on such a minor farmstead. And as you can see, the corn, it's not a lady, it's a man. But as you can see, it's the reaper of corn ears, and the imagery is well, I think it says it all for the farmer, which is important, that he has a good crop. But maybe he invokes a local deity as well in that image. So that will remain a mystery, I think.
I've in fact come across that image at least once in Britain. Mm-hmm. Quite often get reapers. I think it might be represent some local deity. It might be Bonus Aventus, but I think it's very much the fact of reaping the corn is asking for a good harvest. So yeah, it's something like that. But there may well be a local deity. You know, I'm very interested in what you might call Celtic deities, and in Belgium, you actually share the same sort of culture you get in Britain. And again, there will be local deities, versions of what I showed, but actually the same sort of thing. It's in this sort of image that I think you can see somewhere there is a local deity, very likely lurking, but it's very difficult to know who it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the imagery is very very nice, and the place it was found corresponds with it so very much. But I think there are a lot of backgrounds that we still don't know or how to interpret. Thank you very much.
Do we have any more questions? Then I might have another one for Elena. So you thought that you can definitely see a difference between what seems to be an official seal and the power within. Do you think there could be a mixture of this, that even though the seal might be official, there is still the belief in the material that, for example, the amethyst for some reason would prevent you from getting too drunk, things like that. Do you have the feeling that there's any slip over from one of these functions and into others?
The truth is that I cannot be sure about this, but for example, it's very interesting in the works of Christopher Faraone, in which he says that for example, at the beginning in the magical gems, there's only the gem, then the gem with the drawing, and then the gem with the drawing and the something written. And I think that might be the case here too, that maybe first they chose the gem and then they added the iconography. So that could be the case, but of course I'm not sure, but yeah.
Yes, Erika Zwierlein-Diel also writes so wonderfully about Augustus choosing the Sphinx as his emblem at first, just because, you know, he goes through his mother's collection and he finds two which roughly look the same, and he thought this would be really splendid. And then I guess it's the meaning of the Sphinx, the mysticism, which possibly makes him think again that he should seal with an Alexander instead, and switch it around.
I think we have to study further the hybrid beings, because I think they have a lot to say, and I think it's still a lot to be learned about them.
Oh, absolutely. That was so interesting. So any more questions, or shall I leave you to your lunch break? So we're not tremendously late. So yes, thank you so much for all keeping so well to your allotted time. And in spite of the slight problems with doing this online, I think we did really well. So I hope to see you all again after the lunch break for our next exciting session. Werner Eck is the chair for that. So we're going to hear another wonderful talk by Chiara Ballestrazzi and others. Go off, rehydrate, have something to eat. For us, it's coffee time. So I see you all again.